All right, welcome and good afternoon. I'm Alex Grant, and it is such a pleasure to be here with you all today. Of course, we would rather be with you in person, but at least we do have this opportunity to gather together and connect this way. Over the past few weeks, the USGLC has had the privilege of hosting multiple conversations in Illinois on America's role in the world in the midst of COVID-19 and why leading globally impacts us locally. We've been honored to hold conversations with Congresswoman Sherry Bustos, Congressman Roger Krishnamurthy, and today we are honored to have Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky with us today. A few quick instructions to get us started. Please keep yourself on mute. We would prefer to have your video on so we can see everyone's lovely faces. And during the Q&A section, we'll take a couple of questions from the audience. Use that raise hand feature or *9 on your phone. Now, I know many of you have joined us before, but in case you're new, let me give you a little bit of background about who we are and what we've been doing over the past 25 years at the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition. We are over 500 American businesses and humanitarian organizations, alongside our network of business, faith, military, and community leaders from all across the country. Our bipartisan National Advisory Council is chaired by Secretary Colin Powell and made up of our nation's top national security and foreign policy leaders, including most every living former Secretary of State. Our National Security Advisory Council is comprised of over 200 retired generals and flag officers, and our Veterans for Smart Power initiative is made up of over 30,000 veterans from across the country, many of whom are right here in Illinois. And what brings everyone together is a belief that America's role in the world matters to American families, and that when America leads, we all win. It's the belief that strategic investments in development and diplomacy are essential to protecting our national security, advancing our economic interest, and projecting the best of American values. And we talk about why a tiny 1% of the federal budget, called the International Affairs Budget, is one of the most cost-effective and powerful investments that America can make. Now, sometimes it's called the foreign aid budget, but it is so much more than that. It is our diplomats and our embassies around the world, support for our key allies, programs that create jobs, open new markets, responding to humanitarian disasters, working to battle the root causes of terrorism, and efforts to tackle global health threats like Ebola and COVID-19, which I know for everyone has truly been a wake-up call that what happens overseas impacts us here at home. That 1% investment is an effective, accountable, and transparent investment, and it delivers for the American people. And we have hosted forums like this with people all across the country and have had the honor of witnessing firsthand Americans from every political spectrum and state line across these state lines who want to engage. They know that it is important to be involved, and we are happy to have you all with us here today, joining alongside them. In addition to our great crowd that we have here from Illinois, we have someone who has joined a number of these forums around the country, Dan Glickman, former Secretary of Agriculture. Dan, I would love to turn it over to you.
Okay, well, listen, thanks, Alex. And first, may I say that I feel sometimes like a fellow Illinoisan. I'm on the board of the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, and I'm a fellow in food and agriculture at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. So, and my brother-in-law is at DLA Piper, and so there's a lot of connections with Chicago. But I'm really here to introduce my friend and former colleague, Jan Schakowsky. We both served in Congress. She's been a longtime member, but not only a member, but one of the smartest, most compassionate people I ever served with in Congress. And I say that not to patronize her. We traveled together as part of the Aspen Institute to many countries, she and Bob, and she came to dozens of Aspen Institute breakfasts, most of which were involved with global affairs. She's been an amazing leader in the COVID-19 response. She's in the House leadership. She's on the House Budget Committee. She chairs a critical subcommittee on the House Energy and Commerce Committee. She's a member of the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission. She's traveled extensively around the world, understands just the unique nature of this world and America's role in this world. So when I saw that Jan was going to be part of this discussion, I just had to be there because we know each other well and we've traveled together, and I can vouch for her leadership, her compassion, her empathy, and her authenticity. So with that, Jan, I'm going to turn it over to Alex to moderate today's discussion, where you are the star. Okay.
Thank you.
Congresswoman, you have a lot to live up to now. So excited to get into the conversation. And we're going to start off today discussing some of our most pressing global challenges and opportunities, and then we'll open it up to all of our leaders here on the call with us. So, of course, this past year, the world has been upended by COVID-19, and it's placed our country at a crossroad for U.S. global leadership. Global poverty has increased for the first time in decades. Authoritarianism is on the rise, and a record number of people are in need of humanitarian assistance. India is a stark reminder that the pandemic is not over and that U.S. leadership is needed now more than ever.
Right.
And in the face of this, the USGLC consulted with experts and discovered that $14 billion in new resources were identified that the development diplomacy programs need in order to tackle the challenges that are presented by COVID-19. Congressman, what is America's role, or what should America's role in the world be in this changing global landscape? And what do you see as the greatest threats and opportunities that we face as a country today? Easy question to kick it off.
Well, thank you, Alex. Well, let me just first say that America is back on the national stage, which is great. And Dan, the opportunities, so many of them that I've had to see places around the world that validate my impression on how important our leadership is, that as American leadership, were provided by the Aspen Institute. And I think there is no substitute for actually being there on the ground. So I'm ever grateful to you for that. So the very first day of the Biden administration, we rejoined the Paris Climate Accord, rejoined the World Health Organization. And I think those were real signals to say that the United States understands and accepts the important leadership role that we have. And of course, we are facing incredible challenges right now. The climate, I think, is existential. Income inequality and poverty around the world, as you pointed out, it's actually increased. I think that the gender bias, which has continued to diminish the role of women, militarization, the spread of authoritarian countries and leadership around the world. But I really do think this is a great moment of opportunity. I think the world has just been waiting for some real leadership that understands how important it is. And so thank goodness now that we are in a place that can be delivered. So I'm really excited about moving forward on the global stage with the new president, and of course with now a House of Representatives, which narrowly has the majority, and even more narrowly a Senate that I think understands these issues better.
And so I mentioned in the question about India and how that is really a prime example of why America needs to continue to lead. Can you share your thoughts on why investing in the COVID-19 fight in India and around the world is so important? And why does that matter to families in Illinois? Why does that matter to your constituents that we invest in preventing the spread of COVID-19 around the world?
Well, you know what? We're at risk if we don't. It's great as we see those numbers go down in terms of the deaths, the hospitalizations. That's great. The fact that the CDC has said, I was just at an event where actually it was outside and no masks. I saw some friends that I hadn't seen for a while. So, this is really feeling liberating. And as you mentioned earlier, Alex, sometimes you feel like you're maybe doing something wrong by being maskless and touching people. But If we do not understand that the virus anywhere is a threat to us everywhere, we could be at great risk, actually sooner rather than later, because variants are coming up. And so I've been very involved in trying to get, and thankfully the president agreed, a waiver at the World Trade Organization that would allow other countries to waive the intellectual property rights. We have pharma companies that want to maintain their monopoly and really are fighting against allowing this to happen. So this is an ongoing battle to save the world from the virus. I think it's very important that countries like India are able to actually manufacture with recipe for how to do it. And so that they actually have the expertise. We hear from Big Pharma and others saying that these countries are not capable. I did want to say one other thing that I read in your introductions, talking about the foreign affairs assistance budget, and that the American people think about 25% of the budget goes to foreign, goes out of the country and goes to foreign countries. And actually it's less than 1%. So here's my idea. I thought we'd call for the 2% solution. We say the foreign assistance budget, I'm sorry, it cannot be more than 2%. It can only go to 2% of the budget, which of course would be a doubling, more than a doubling. I love it. And I think if people heard that they might say, oh yeah, come on, that's, a tiny amount and that's reasonable and that's what we should do. So what do you think about that campaign? You want to join it?
I love it. Absolutely. And the thing about this too, it's one of the few budget items that actually brings money back into the treasury, which a lot of people don't realize, that there are programs here that bring money back. We're not just sending that out. So I love it. I would love to work with you on sending that message out across America. So, well, Dan, I want to bring you back into the conversation here because we do so much work with you around global impact or global engagement and local impact. And I want to, continue talking about why we can't afford to take our foot off the gas pedal when it comes to global COVID-19 response. And putting aside the avoidable human suffering, the threat of global virus surges, they threaten our health and economic recovery. And the Illinois economy, as the Congresswoman mentioned, it depends on exports overseas, including to many development countries where they've been hit hardest by the pandemic and economic downturn. So how do these efforts to support societies overseas also help the jobs and economic growth here at home? Dan.
Well, I've just reinforced what Jan said. We're linked to the rest of the world. I think it was Will Rogers who once said America has two of the greatest friends in the world. They are the Atlantic and the Pacific Oceans. Well, that may have been true in Will's day, but it's certainly not true in our day when diseases can spread like wildfire around the world, and where America's economic security is so inextricably tied to the rest of the world. I mean, Illinois is either the first or second largest soybean and corn producing state in the country. Chicago is the great industrial and manufacturing metropolis of this country. And, jobs in Illinois are directly related to the health of the rest of the world. If people are sick and dying and not doing well and don't have enough money, then that's going to impact the ability of American citizens and Illinois citizens to make a good living. And it's also in our best interest to make sure that people are healthy and thriving everywhere.
Right. And, you can't talk about lifting up societies without talking about women and girls and the impact that they have on their society. And Congresswoman, this is something you've been a champion on global women's issues in Congress, supporting legislation to combat violence against women, promote women's participation in peace processes, and keeping girls in school around the world. And unfortunately, the pandemic has had a disproportionate impact on women and girls. A recent report from the World Economic Forum found that the global gender gap has increased by a generation over the past year as a result of the pandemic. How can our investments in empowering women and girls lift societies out of poverty, help them recover, and why are these investments good for our own economy as well? Why does that matter to our folks here at home?
Well, for decades, really, the United Nations has pointed out how investing in women will make countries safer, more peaceful, reduce birth rates, in every way. It really, empowering women is the key. And women everywhere are suffering right now, and have suffered through the virus even more, as you pointed out. But what we know is that the gender gap is not good for anyone. When women succeed, countries succeed, and we want to make sure that happens. And let me refer to Illinois for just a minute. The wage gap is just enormous right here as well. We find that on average, women make 78 cents an hour here in Illinois compared to what a man, an Illinoisan, makes. And for Black women, it's 62 cents. 62 cents, and for Latinas, it's 49 cents. I mean, come on. We need, and women have suffered worse through this pandemic, because, in fact, most of the unemployment that we see, certainly last April, almost 100% of it was women, because we haven't had a caring economy to provide childcare, and fortunately, we have the child tax credit now. I introduced and passed during the Trump administration a bill called Women, Peace, and Security. And what we know is, and it was totally bipartisan, what we know is that when women are involved in conflict mediation and making treaties, that they actually last longer than those that exclude women. But I have to also say that women seem to be at the head of the line, speaking up and making their voices heard all over the world right now. And so we want to foster that. We want to foster that at home. Women are leading most of the major movements that are happening right now. And we want to make sure that that happens around the world. There's been so many disparities that have been made clear in high relief since COVID. The unfortunate numbers when it comes to child, mother and child mortality. And, the United States ranks one of the worst among the developed nations, but it's certainly a huge issue around the world in developing and low income countries that we need to do. But the amazing thing, or maybe not so amazing, is that we know how to address these things, that poverty has actually been reduced in half. I know we see an uptick now from the strategies that have been developed over time. We can make people healthier using the strategies that we know. So it is not hopeless by any means, and people think, oh, all this money we spend, this 25%, it doesn't make a difference. It makes a difference, that even that less than 1%. By the way, we do, in just dollars, spend more than other countries on foreign assistance. But when it comes to the percentage of GDP, we are behind almost all of the developed countries in the amount that we actually spend. So we can do more. We can do more for families. We can do more for women. We can do more for peace and security if we make these investments. It's good for us.
Absolutely. And to your point, leadership starts here at home. And that global image that America wants to project of equity and equality for women and girls to be able to have that opportunity for economic growth of their own families is something that we should strive for. And this budget is a means to try and do that. And your leadership has been a key part of making sure that that continues throughout the world and here at home. I want to bring in one of your constituents here who has done some work. He was a Peace Corps volunteer, I believe. Mark, why don't you come up on screen here? Because you have a question, I believe, that's somewhat in line with the conversation that we have right now. So Mark, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Alex, and good afternoon, Congresswoman. My question actually relates to our competition with China, which seems to be ramping up around the world in multiple spheres at this time, from 5G and telecommunications to development aid, vaccine policy. It's clear that strengthening our economic competitiveness with China is a challenge, and this is going to require using all the tools in our toolkit, including our investments in diplomacy and in development. So I would like to ask, how can we better leverage these tools and our other strategic advantages to compete with China and advance our interests abroad?
Well, it's really, I mean, when we look at China today, they're the biggest driver right now of climate change. About half of the coal is in China. I just had a conversation actually with the Consul General located in Chicago in the Midwest, and brought up the issues of the Uyghur people, of the oppression that we see and that's why we certainly want to lead by example, because the world, and China as well, is looking at the systemic racism that has also been uncovered here, but nothing like what we see of the Uyghurs. And so we are in competition. Yes, we are with China. There's no question about it. It comes up at all of the hearings that we have. But I actually, I'm having a hearing on next Tuesday on manufacturing with the Secretary of, she's the Secretary of Commerce for the United States. And that's one of the things that we're going to talk about. How can we ramp up manufacturing here? You know that we rely on China for many of the component parts of everything from vaccines and medications to many other products. Why aren't we developing manufacturing here at home? I think this is an absolutely great opportunity for us to be leaders when it comes to climate. We can be the leader in electric cars and all the technologies for clean technology. If we roll up our sleeves and make a determination that these are the sectors where the United States can lead, I think it's really, really important for us to do that, and I think we're going to have a lot of opportunities to be truly competitive. We can't be competitive when when we can I say piss off our allies that we've had, as we did in the last administration. We want to make sure that we understand about trade agreements, and that they bolster the countries that we're trading with, as well as, and in some ways, China is eating our lunch in terms of what it's doing for other countries. It is a larger investor in Central and South America than the United States of America. Why is that? Why aren't we making those kinds of investments in countries that then can be good trading partners with us? Everywhere you go in Africa, that's where you're going to see China a much greater presence. And I think it is really worth it for us to look around the world and see emerging markets and understand that when we help those countries, even with humanitarian assistance, it will come back to our benefit. on the vaccines. China and Russia are doing more for other countries than the United States of America is doing so far. So I just think that the doors, not just door, but doors are open for us to be competitive, not only competitive, but to be leaders around the world. And that China, who's having a population issue now, I find that sort of ironic, that we absolutely can compete as a democracy in every facet now of the economy. We can lead and compete.
Yep. And Dan, I see you're off mute because I want to bring you into this. This is something you talked a lot about, Chinese investment in Africa in particular, and the Chinese government, to be clear. I always like to make sure that I'm clear in the language that we use here. And Dan, would love your thoughts on what this investment means to, what their investment in Africa means to American families here at home, and what's the danger of that?
Well, again, playing off what Jan said, because I agree with her totally. But if you travel in China, and I've been more to in Africa, I'm sorry. If you've been more in I've been more in East Africa than the rest of the country. But you see the Chinese very much involved in infrastructure projects all over the country, all over the continent. Kenya, Tanzania, Ethiopia, and other countries as well. So they build this infrastructure, and of course that allows them to have permanent economic influence in that part of the world. And it's not perfect, because the Chinese are not necessarily the best citizens of other parts of the world when they invest there. We know that. And we know that a lot of places would like to see much more American investment with the history of USAID and Department of Agriculture and humanitarian assistance. But once you get a foothold in, it's hard to get it out, or it's hard to get your own foothold in. And so, and the other thing is that I think, as Jan alluded, the Chinese have not necessarily been at the vanguard of humanitarian assistance either. I mean, their interests are in economic and political self-interest. And, you know, we have some of that ourselves, but we also have this great history of helping people who are hurting, of building up their own families, their own own self-help, own self-sufficiency. I see that in agriculture particularly. So if we're out of the game, they're in the game. And that has a big impact on Illinois and other states in the country.
Exactly.
Great, thank you. And I see there are some questions. We're going to try and get those to the end. We have a couple more to go through here. If you want to write it in the chat, that's perfectly fine too, and we'll circle back to those at the end.
Yes, I see my alderman has her.
Oh, we'll pull her up.
That'd be great.
Pull them up. Go right ahead.
Thanks so much, Alex, and thanks, Jan. Thank you for the invite. You've been a fantastic representative for our district. This question is for you, but also more broadly to our panel. And I'll say this as someone who formerly interned at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs and studied international studies, and then took a deep dive into hyper-local everything.
It just said Alderman Maria Haddon. If anybody doesn't
right. Local things and local issues and focusing on community things has been a huge focus for me. But I can also say myself, and certainly those younger generations, there seems to be very few lines and little difference between the local and the global, right? And these impacts and how we're connected. And Congresswoman, you were talking about kind of that 2% plan, which I love. And I'm wondering too, as we think about, do you think, and what could change of who's having influence on our decision-making on how we get involved globally? Because I feel like maybe in comparison to some of the other countries, our federal government isn't driving the work as much as maybe we could, as opposed to maybe kind of private industry. Because I do think we should have a stronger role. And I do think we should have more of a say, especially when I think about that local to global connection of how our kids in Rogers Park understanding and giving access to the world. How can we make sure like our workforce and our kids here are as sought after in other countries, right, as some of the talent we recruit in other countries to bring here. And I just wonder if you could speak a little bit to what more can we do on the government side and working with our federal partners?
Well, first of all, we have to undo some of the damage that was done for the last 4 years. And I think that President Biden is doing that. I think he has been sending clear signals, and the Congress, I think through our Appropriations Committee, our Foreign Affairs Committee, is also making it clear that we are players. Not that we intend to be, but that we are. And let me just say about your district and my district, your ward. People come from all over the world. My high school that I went to, Sullivan High School, is often called Refugee High because so many languages, dozens, scores of languages spoken there, because people are coming here. So in some ways we see the amazing talent that is coming. In some ways we see what the amazing needs that are coming. The refugee resettlement organizations are picking up once again, because now we're actually beginning to welcome people into this country, that the United States does have an asylum system that can work. And so I really do think that this is a moment, and that exactly what you're asking for is what we can deliver now with this new president. As long and of course that means elections, we have to keep majorities, but I really do think that most people are beginning to see, because of the diversity of our country, the need to engage in a way that maybe we haven't even done ever before, but certainly what we haven't done in the last administration. It's getting better.
Alderman, thank you for that wonderful question. And I would just add, encourage those kids to get into foreign policy. Our foreign policy community needs to look like America. It's strange that American foreign policy doesn't necessarily represent every community here. And I would encourage you to, connect them to our organization and find ways that we can get them engaged here. I mentioned the Chicago Council, so that feels like a wonderful opportunity to bring in Elizabeth, who is with the Chicago Council. So Elizabeth, I know you have a question, so go right ahead.
Thank you so much, Alex. And thank you so much for being here, Congresswoman. I was really happy to hear you mention women in peace and security, and I've been grateful for your leadership on that direction. As a former career diplomat, I know firsthand that women are often not having a strong position in the room for, they're very vocal on the outside, but when it comes to negotiations and actions on the ground, we often don't have them well represented, and that has an impact on the effectiveness. But from a bigger standpoint, I understand that a lot of our country's challenges and our foreign policy challenges can't be solved by the military alone, and yet we continue to resource the military far, far better than we do diplomacy and the soft power that should be our lines of first defense. This is more crucial every day: humanitarian crises, free press under assault, climate change accelerating. These are issues that we need more well-resourced kind of foreign policy tools to address, as you've already mentioned. But how can we rebuild the State Department and USAID, not just to where they were, before 2016 when they came under assault, but to be in a better position to take the lead in foreign policy than they even were before? As a diplomat, I often felt as though we were very hamstrung and under-resourced, and that was one of the reasons that our military took the lead. So I'm wondering how we can address that now, both from a resource perspective and just from a prioritization. And how can we communicate to the American people, to the people in Illinois and in the Midwest, that this is also in their interest as well?
Well, I certainly agree with you 100% that the military budget is over-resourced, and that the foreign affairs budget is under-resourced, even as we go for the same goal, which is security in our country. And I'm glad to see, again, that diplomacy is back. Barbara Lee, who's in charge of the foreign affairs budget, couldn't agree with you more. Rosa DeLauro, who is now the chairman of the full Appropriations Committee, would agree. And Adam Smith, who's head of the Armed Services, the chair of the Armed Services Committee, is well aware of this priority, and he has said that we can get to work on doing that. And so I can't emphasize enough how I, as a former, and I still think continuing organizer, you know, that outside groups, and here's a powerful organ, you represent, 500 organizations are part of this. If you reach a consensus and talk to members of Congress, and by the way, the administration is talking much more to members of Congress. The State Department just gave us a briefing on what's going on in the Middle East for some of us who have been really concerned about this. And I think that kind of partnership is also very, very useful. So decision-making is not just unilaterally out of the administration, out of the State Department, but there are avenues for input. So I would just really encourage that. I mean, we spend more on the military than the next 10 largest countries combined. Come on, we do not need to spend all that money. It would be, as you say, I think, better spent if we would put more, of course, the State Department was pretty much hollowed out entirely over the last four years. I mean, it's just horrifying, really. And we could barely reach individuals at the State Department, partly because no one was home. So I think, again, when we talk about opportunities now, let's take advantage of them. Inside and outside, I talk about it as an inside-outside strategy. And, we personally could talk more, but, the U.S. Global, could also talk about it that way. And so let's have a strategy on how we put more money. We know where it comes from. It can come from that. Sometimes I don't even like to call it defense, because I'm not sure it's our best defense to load up the defense budget. I mean, it's more, the military budget. So I'm with you 100%. Let's take advantage now of this opportunity.
And we work with so many, generals and veterans that agreed that diplomacy and development is an essential tool, and that they want that investment as well. So it is well known that this is a critical part of our national security toolkit. And thankfully, we have members of Congress that are fighting to put the proper investments into this area. We're running short on time, so I have one more question that I want to make sure we go over, because I know it's really important to the Congresswoman and also to the area, and that's talking about climate change. Because this is a global challenge that requires the use of our full foreign policy toolkit. A recent report found that climate change could reduce the global economic output by 23 trillion with a T dollars every year by the mid-century, alongside the rising cost of climate-driven displacement, disasters, and famine. And developing countries are disproportionately affected by the impacts of climate change. What can we do about this? What can the U.S. and international partners do, Congresswoman, to support these vulnerable communities around the world impacted by climate change?
Well, we better get going, because we're, reaching the tipping point. I mean, this is real. Someone gave me a speech I made on the floor of the Illinois House. I've been in Congress
Early 90s, then, yeah.
on climate and how urgent it was. And we talk about women and girls. Greta Thunberg, a girl, stood up before leaders of the world and said that we're failing her and her generation and the world. And she was really, really angry, and correctly so. So, you know, we have to begin at home too. We are still subsidizing the fossil fuel industry. It's amazing, isn't it? That we still put money into them. Now, they're having a better conversation among themselves right now. That looks like they're starting to understand that. And then, of course, the president just made an important decision this week about the Alaska Wildlife Refuge, and undid the drilling that the Trump administration would have allowed. But in the meantime, in some ways, it's like the pandemic, that we have to be everywhere in terms of leadership. The technologies, we can both sell technologies, but we can also just help all other countries to have those technologies, to have cleaner energy. And, you know, so it could be lucrative, and it could also save our lives. So this is it. You know, we've talked about it for too long. And by the way, there are many members of Congress who still want to pose jobs against the environment, that somehow they're not compatible. It's frustrating. But I think, you know, if we continue to in the direction that we're going now with this Congress and with this White House, that we can actually make some progress.
And it has become a bipartisan issue. We've worked with, you know, a number of members in the Republican Party that agree, especially our friends in Florida that are seeing the effects of climate change in their backyards in Miami.
It's here.
It really, it's an issue that we have to face as a country. And luckily, there are a number of local elected officials on here, and our travels across the country have shown local elected officials are the ones that are carrying the lantern for addressing the issues facing their community as it relates to climate change, especially over the past 4 years, upholding the Paris Climate Accord agreement within their own community. So for those of you who have been,
you know, even if we follow to the letter the Paris Climate Accord, we will be up in increase. You know, we'll still not meet.
It's an extension of time, essentially, more than anything.
Yes,
absolutely. Well, yeah, I want to end our conversation today on a positive note, because we're living in really difficult times right now. But there are glimmers on the horizon that I think a lot of people are looking toward.
I see a hand up, David Moore. We can't do that. Moore? Yeah.
Oh yeah, sure.
Can we do it?
Yeah, if you got the time, we've got the time. David Moore, come on.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman. I appreciate that. And it's actually a double question. I had my hand first, but also my colleague and my chairman, Alderman Pat Dow, put the question in the chat, so you can get to kill two birds with one stone, actually. She may have it from another angle, but in terms of the cyber attacks, my question is, at what point do we see that as an act of war versus just extortion?
Well, we certainly are focused on that right now, because we're seeing an increase. The original, it seems to originate from Russia. I don't know what the conversations have been between the president and Putin, but certainly having some accountability of the government to the Russian government to stop these kinds of attacks. And I would agree with you. Those are potentially paralyzing attacks. I mean, what we saw with gas prices rising as a consequence, you know, there's real life serious consequences. And I know that the administration and members of Congress are very anxious to do more than we have now that we have seen the vulnerability. And, you know, I spent 8 years on the Intelligence Committee, and a lot of talk about cyber. And I think that we have to up our game. I thought it then, and I think it now. And I think those may be, that may be the way war is waged going forward, or at least part of what a military strategy could be. Yeah, I agree with you. Got to do it.
Thank you, Congresswoman.
Sure, of course.
Great. So we have other questions in the queue if you have time, or we'll go ahead. I know we have a tight schedule here, so I'll
Go
leave it
ahead.
to you.
No, go ahead. I couldn't resist the hand up. So
Completely understand. Well, let's go back, because I really would love to hear from you on that hope that you feel looking ahead after a really challenging year of how we can rebuild our economy and provide hope to each other as we look forward to the next few months and moving out of the pandemic.
one of the things that has really given me hope is that I'm seeing mobilization of ordinary Americans that are really speaking out, acting out, contacting decision makers. I think this is really, really healthy. We hear strong voices from women and young people and communities of color. And now that we've really uncovered all the inequities, demands now on our part for solutions here at home too. I feel that the power that I am feeling right now among the electorate that wants positive change, and of course that means also being able to participate fully in elections. So I think that if we see things like hunger as a choice, as a decision, it's not inevitable. Homelessness is not inevitable. And somehow, like a natural disaster. So we can, if we decide, we make a decision, we make a choice, that we can end global hunger, that we can address climate change. It's within our power as a people of the world, and as leaders among them, the countries of the world, to address this issue of poverty and income inequality. It's ours to decide. And so if we can feel empowered as the United States of America, as individual people in the United States of America, as organizations like yours in our country, then I think that we can do whatever we choose to do, whatever we decide to do. And so that keeps me going. If we choose to ignore these the suffering that we see around the world, we can do that too. I think that's what we've done, or maybe even contribute to it. But I think now is a moment where we can make different decisions and different choices as the richest country in the world. I say that all the time. How can it be that such a large percentage of Americans said we're hungry during this pandemic? How does that happen in the richest country in the world? And it goes to the rest of the world as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you, and Congresswoman, thank you for being with us today and for all of your thoughts, and that wonderful answer at the end, that the power and the choice that we have available to us is really a wonderful way to end our conversation. And I want to bring up Robert Watson, who organized today to close us out and wrap everything up.
And if I just may say, the 2% solution, the Schakowsky 2% solution, we need to take back with us. That seems to be our marching orders too. So just in that way.
If you want to go to 3, I wouldn't complain either. But yeah, great.
Well, Alex, thanks for handing it over. Thanks for moderating today. We really appreciate it. We've been doing so many events in Illinois lately, and it's always a great audience. So thanks for everyone being here. Congresswoman, it's always great speaking with you. We love the way you talk about these issues, and it is really inspiring, especially that last bit on hope. It is a pivotal moment for our country, so it's important that we're having these conversations. And I'd really like to thank, especially Mark and Elizabeth, for your questions. We really appreciate that. And a big thanks to our Illinois Advisory Committee and our Veterans for Smart Power who joined us today. This work could not be done without you all on the ground. This is where these conversations need to be happening, as I mentioned, amongst our family and friends and in forums like this. So we really are appreciative of you joining this conversation. And to thank Congresswoman Schakowsky as well. It does go a long way when you can tell your Congress or Congress member or your representative how much you appreciate what they're doing. It does make a world of difference. So please keep that up. Thank you again. Stay in touch. I'd also like to remind you, we have our Global Impact Forum on June 15th from 1 to 3 p.m. We'll be bringing together top political and policy leaders from all across the country, alongside thousands of diverse voices from businesses, nonprofits, faith, national security communities, for a dynamic live conversation on this topic itself. So for more information, you can sign up at forum.usglc.org. And additionally, for up-to-the-minute updates, you can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, or pick your poison with the social media. And thanks again. We really do appreciate your time. I will be following up with each and every one of you. There are opportunities to get more engaged. And like I said, it's an important time to be having this conversation. So I'll talk to you soon and take care.
Thank you. Appreciated this.